Welcome to the final segment of the Dynamic Leadership Development Plan series. Today we're talking about how to embed development into your culture, not as a form, not as a one-time meeting, but as something that lives in the way that you lead and manage every day. Let's start with the simple idea that's easy to say and hard to live. Leadership is not one size fits all. I recall reading that the highest form of discrimination is treating everyone the same. And it took me some time to think through that, but I get it. And it's very similar to the statement that leadership is not one size fits all. But most systems pretend that it is. Outdated playbooks and rigid roles often push leaders to act the same regardless of context, charging ahead when they should pause, rallying the team when the energy is flat, or forcing structures when autonomy would serve better. This segment offers a clear, flexible tool to help you lead with more intention by recognizing where you are and responding in a way that supports intrinsic motivation, capability, and growth. And I like to use frameworks because they help when it's the most difficult. It's the most difficult when we're on the verge of fight or flight. And with the VUCA environment that's going on, I'm recording this in April of 2025 in the US, there's so much going on that the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity can rise to that level where we're always on edge. Well, when we're on edge, we tend to go with survival reactions instead of well thought out plans or going back to our strategy. We react. And those reactions, if the reaction then equals the response, which then equals the action, then we're operating out of the past, out of the associations of what worked in the past, but we're in a new situation now. That's why I like to use frameworks, and I'll introduce one today to help you with making sure that we're living the development plans. Now, we call it the current situation grid, a 4-box tool built on 2 simple questions. Internally, are we performing or underperforming? Externally, is the environment favorable or challenging? That's it. 2 dimensions, 4 combinations, but it opens the door to smarter, more aligned conversations. This works whether you're looking at an individual, a team, a department, or the entire organization. It gives language to what you might already feel, but may not be saying out loud. Here's why this matters. Let's say a team is hitting their numbers in a favorable market. Great, but it's worth asking, are we building capability or just riding momentum? Or maybe a team is performing well despite tough conditions. Maybe there's turnover, supply chain disruptions, or market shifts. That's not just success, it's resilience. Now that's where multiplier behavior shows up. On the flip side, if results are down in an otherwise favorable environment, it's time to dig deeper. Is the issue focus, clarity, execution? And when both performance and conditions are tough, the answer isn't to push harder. The answer is to realign. Maybe that means redefining success for a season, protecting morale, or introducing metrics that foster learning, not burnout. This is essential to maintaining a growth mindset. It's very easy to slip into a fixed mindset when things seem to stop working, things we've relied on. And this is where the survival response can kick in when we least need it. This tool helps you see clearly and choose the next step more intelligently. And here's the key. It's not a scoring system. There are no right boxes. This is a conversation starter, a shared lens. It helps you and your teams acknowledge the internal and external state, to get on the same page, to use a common language, so you can solve the right version of the problem. Remember, the first step of problem solving is clearly define the problem. And as I often like to say, Albert Einstein once said that if he had an hour to solve a problem, he would spend the first 55 minutes talking about and clarifying the problem, and then the last 5 minutes on the solution. Now, that ratio doesn't hold true as the problems get larger and the time allowed is greater, but you get the point. So you define what performance means. It might be revenue, customer experience, project velocity. You define what favorable means. In your world, could be interest rates, demand, hiring climate, regulatory changes. Now that's the point. You own the inputs. And this is why dynamic leadership makes it so easy to live in your organization. And I say one of the reasons why dynamic leadership does not get a lot of press, because you fill in the blanks, not some university or not some think tank. You're filling in the blanks. Now, this is a tool that adapts to your context, not one that dictates behavior, and is designed to scale. It's fractal, meaning the same conversation structure works at the executive level, in a team meeting, or in a one-on-one. Now, you can apply it to strategy, capability, development, employee coaching, or performance feedback. And underneath it all is self-determination theory, which tells us that people are most motivated when they experience autonomy, the ability to influence their work, competence, the sense of growth and mastery, relatedness, a connection to others and shared goals. When leaders ignore these drivers, especially under stress, we often shift into diminisher behaviors. We try to control when what's needed is support. We tighten our grip when what's needed is trust. But when we lean into multiplier behaviors, we create environments where people can grow through challenge, not fear. That's why this grid matters. It helps you hold two truths at once. We need results and we need people to thrive. As we move forward, we'll look at how to apply this framework in practice. We'll revisit the multiplier versus diminisher mindset, review the feedback model from earlier segments, and connect this framework to personality styles and motivation, because in the end, leadership is less about knowing what to do and more about knowing how to think, how to see clearly, and how to respond. You don't need more resources, you need more resourcefulness. And that starts with seeing your current situation, then choosing the next step with clarity. So let's get into it. I'm going to go to the pad. Remember this 4-grid current situation. And the reason this makes sense is because when I first learned about the SWOT analysis decades ago, right? I mean, you do a SWOT analysis and it didn't change. First of all, it was more of a manufacturing environment, less of a technology environment, but the SWOT analysis didn't change very much, right? So a few years later, that SWOT analysis still held because manufacturing, it tends to move slowly. And, the leaders tended to last for years, sometimes decades, the top people in your industry or in your sector. But now with startups and private equity and buying and selling firms and so much going on, the change can happen quickly. Before you even get the strategy working on all legs, that SWOT analysis can be out of date. So the 4-grid situation is this. We have performing. How are we doing? Are we doing what we should be? Are our results where they should be? And you choose the metrics. You choose the KPIs. You choose the hierarchy. Is growth more than profit? Is profit more important than growth? And then the next one, obviously, we would have underperforming. Now, the metrics, the measures could be the same, but I would introduce a how, right? The conversation we're in is getting your development, your leadership development to live, embedding it into your culture, into how you run your organization. And in the development plans, we talked about the what is the result and the how is how we get that result, which means how is a part of the conversation. We don't want to be an organization that results by any means necessary, because this is where you get cutting corners. This is where you get shoddy, poor quality, potentially short-term thinking, expediency, and these things don't age well when it comes to having people thrive in the organization. So I would, regardless of what metrics you put up here, I would definitely put a how, because we don't want to improve the results and miss the importance of the how. And then we have the environment. So this would be internal, and this is external. And we have to consider the environment. Is it favorable? Again, you fill in the blanks, right? If you're selling capital, if it's capital equipment, maybe it's what's going on with the interest rates. What are the competitors doing? What is pricing doing? Is there a new trend coming up? So is it favorable or is it challenging? Now, this is not to say that if it's challenging, we excuse the results. That's not how this goes. I would say that when you look at self-determination theory, relatedness, people want to be seen. It's important to acknowledge, when you're talking about results, it's important to acknowledge that the environment is challenging. You don't want to just gloss over that and launch into talking to the person about where they're deficient. You want to acknowledge it, and then you can pivot the conversation to things along the lines of innovation or getting other people in the boat or trying trial and error or starting some skunk works, maybe getting out there and talking to customers, finding out what's going on. You have to get more information because in challenging environments, there's often opportunities, right? This is a shift. Things are shifting. And the early adopters or the people who get in there early can get the opportunity. This is, the saying that you never let a crisis go unused. It's kind of like that. So we want to know, are we in a favorable environment or a challenging environment? And then these are the ones we want to watch for. If it's a favorable environment and the person's underperforming, this is not a good sign. You may have a mismatch here. Maybe they're in the wrong position. Maybe something's going on. You got to find out what's happening. On the contrary, if you have a challenging situation and a high performer, you likely have somebody who's really leaning into the multiplier type behavior. So this is important. I mentioned this underperforming in a favorable environment. They might have challenges going on internally, but there's something else that could be happening. And this is why I recommend doing 360s. Now there's formal 360s that are facilitated. That's at one end of the continuum. And then you can have half and half. You can have a formal 360, but you facilitate it in-house. If you have an HR department, they would take a role with that, of course. But you can do a dynamic 360 at any time, and it's called start, stop, continue. In my opinion, this is underrated. So what you do, here's how it works. At the beginning of your checkpoint meeting or when you're setting up the checkpoint meeting, let them know as part of the meeting, you do want to get some ideas about how we can improve things around here. And the connection could be, it's a VUCA environment, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Things are changing all the time. We're sure there's some opportunities. Maybe some doors are open, were closed before. Maybe there's some new opportunities. Maybe our capital position makes it possible to take on some things that maybe technology has made it. There's a lot of context for why to ask the people on the front line or your direct reports for ideas about what you can do to move the action forward. So it goes like this. In the context of being a high-performing organization, either me as the leader or the leadership team, what are some things that you think, in your opinion, that we should start doing to move further towards being high-performing? And listen. Don't defend. Just listen. Maybe take a note or two, but you want to be watching them. You want to make sure you're listening and hearing and sending signals that this is okay, that you're okay. Yes, you can go down that path. Yes, you can criticize me. It's a safe space. The first time, people will be cautious. If you do this 2 or 3 times, by the 3rd or 4th time, they're just telling you. Why? Because one, there's not a lot of negatives that they have. It's 1 or 2 things. Because they see you actually pay attention to it and do something about it, they will share it. And then it just gets better and better. The first time it may be uncomfortable for you, it'll be uncomfortable for them. But the main thing is don't judge, don't evaluate what they're saying, don't defend, just listen and encourage more talking. Tell me more about that. Really, tell me more. Is it this way or is it more that way? Just not judging, not challenging them, but just to get clarity. And then after they've exhausted the start, which is, like I said, it's usually only one thing. And you might have to press them. Well, there's got to be something we can do. I mean, maybe throw some suggestions out there based on what you've been hearing. And then the next one is, okay, now I know that sometimes we may be pushing as hard as we can, but there's some things that we're doing that are getting in the way. Maybe some old playbook activities that don't make sense anymore. What are some of the things that me or the leadership team should stop doing? I like doing it just me, but by opening up to the leadership team, it creates a safer space. But you don't want to take yourself off the hot seat. What are some things that we should stop doing that are getting in the way, that are maybe causing some friction or maybe causing some rework, maybe hurting quality? And this is interesting because I've seen organizations layer quality on with checking and testing and checking and testing and correcting instead of going back to the root cause. I talk about, at some point, you want to make sure you're draining the swamp, not just fighting alligators. You want to go upstream and deal with the root causes so you're not always correcting. I've seen organizations that they tear things down and start over again. They're wasting so much resources. They're They're wasting